most people who are listening to this either want to lose weight or gain muscle, right? So let's explain the basics, because like we talked about earlier in this talk, there's people trying to sell like, oh, if you eat this coconut oil or you eat this specific diet, that's going to burn more calories and you're going to do better. But there's some sort of basic tenets, right? Basal metabolic rate, energy expenditure, calories. Let's explain that to the audience so they sort of understand.
At the end of the day, when you eat, you are ingesting carbon skeletons with some other stuff on it. And your body has to do something with those carbon skeletons. They don't flutter off into oblivion. And you are not creating carbons out of nothing. You are not a perpetual motion machine. You do not violate the laws of physics. And, my favorite is when people say, well, humans aren't bomb kilometers. Actually, we kind of are. So did you know when they discovered the Atwater values and whatnot, it's so funny. They calculate So I think there's two kinds of intelligence. There's people like me who I can read about something, learn it, and then teach it. And then there's people who make this shit up just like Newton, Einstein, and people who came up with the idea of a bomb kilometer, which is basically a bomb kilometer, just to give background, is how they determine how many calories are in a food. And calories are literally units of energy. Okay, so energy, calories, completely interchangeable. You can use the two terms interchangeably. And so they're burning a piece of food and it gives off heat. And then that heat has an energy value, which is the calories. And then there's water surrounding this chamber. And that water will increase in temperature based on how much energy is in that food, right? People say, well, we're not bomb kilometers. Okay, well, you oxidize food, you burn, your body gives off heat and energy, and oh, by the way, those come out as carbon dioxide and water in your urine. We can trace all this stuff. This is not magic. We know what's happening. So when people say, I ate in a calorie deficit, I didn't lose weight. No, you didn't. Maybe you ate in what you thought was a calorie deficit. Maybe you ate in what probably should have been a calorie deficit. But if you didn't lose weight and when I say lose weight, here's the other part of that. People weigh in sporadically they weigh like in the morning one day and then a week later they weigh in the afternoon. They go, oh, look, I gained 2 pounds. Calorie deficits don't work. No. You caught a weight fluctuation. Mm-hmm. When I say lose weight, I mean, if you don't on average decrease your body mass over the course of time, you were not in a calorie deficit. Right. So calories in, calories out is the rule. Okay. It's the law. Now, why are people confused by that? Well, the first thing is people, when you hear calories in, calories out, I think a lot of people take that very personally because they feel like there's judgment, there's like a value judgment attached to that, right?
Yeah.
You are eating too much. Take away the self-imposed shame and blame and just try to look at it objectively. If you gained body fat, then you did eat too much for your given level of total daily energy expenditure. Okay? So calories in is how much potential energy in the chemical bonds of the food we eat. That's calories in. The metabolizable energy, because like, for example, insoluble fiber, not really metabolizable energy. The calories outside of things is how much the totality of the energy you expend on a daily basis. And that is broken up into a few different parts. So people use metabolic rate and energy expenditure interchangeably. They're not the same. Metabolic rate is part of your total daily energy expenditure. And for most of us, it's the biggest portion. And so metabolic rate, or it's called resting metabolic rate, basal metabolic rate, resting energy expenditure. There's subtle differences in how each are measured, but it's essentially the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's the cost of keeping the lights on. It's if you're just laying down, doing absolutely nothing, how much energy do you burn over 24 hours? That's your metabolic rate. So that's a chunk. Then you have your physical activity, which you can put into two buckets, purposeful and non-purposeful. Mm-hmm. So purposeful is exercise, right? And non-purposeful is something we call NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is actually a large portion of what we burn on a daily basis. So for example, you're twirling that pen right now, mm-hmm. right? I'm waving my hands around as I talk. Those would fall into the buckets of NEAT because I'm not Well, now I am because I'm thinking about it, but I'm typically not thinking about those things. So fidgeting, pacing, like for example, when I take phone calls, I usually am pacing around without even realizing it. If I'm posting stuff on social media, I'm usually pacing around when I do it. I tend to be a fidgety person. That actually ends up being a decent amount of the energy that you burn per day, and actually ends up being very modifiable, which I'll get to in a minute. So some people, and this may sound pedantic, but it's important to understand the difference. Some people might say, well, I'm going to go take the stairs today and get my NEAT up. No, if you've decided to do it, it's now exercise. It's not NEAT. NEAT is completely unconscious movement. And the reason it's important is NEAT is probably one of the biggest determinants of whether somebody is obese prone or obese resistant phenotype. People who are obese prone, if they overeat, they don't compensate by spontaneously increasing their energy expenditure. But obese resistant phenotypes, if they overeat, they tend to just compensate by, without even realizing it, they increase their energy expenditure. In fact, there's a classic study from 1995 by Levine, where they overfed, I think it was, I might butcher the details of the study, but the crux will be correct. I think they overfed them by like 1,000 calories a day for like 8 weeks, something like that. And, they should have gained, something like, 7-8 kilos of body fat. Mm-hmm. But the spread was like over 8 kilos to 0.8 kilos, something like that.
Wow.
Right? So one person almost didn't gain anything despite overeating by 1,000 calories. And they found that this person just spontaneously increased their energy expenditure without even realizing it. They just moved more without even realizing it. And so that's kind of that obese resistant phenotype. But again, that is a subconscious, unconscious thing. It's not like you can, people, I think because it's in the bucket of physical activity, people put it as it's in your control. That portion of it is not. It's not in your control. Now, you can compensate by doing more purposeful activity if you want. Mm-hmm. But again, it's purposeful. And then the other final kind of bucket for our total daily energy expenditure is what's called the thermic effect of food, which is you need to put in energy in to get energy out of the food you eat. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to generalize because it's probably very food specific. But fats, for example, if you eat 100 calories from fat, your TEF is like 0 to 3%. So your net 97 to 100 calories. If you eat carbohydrate, it's like 5 to 10%. So you net 90, 95 calories. And if it's protein, it's like 20, 30%. So you net 70, 80 calories. Now, TEF only ends up accounting for a couple hundred calories of energy expenditure in total per day. So it's not this massive bucket. But again, those are kind of the four things that contribute to your total daily energy expenditure. Mm-hmm. So how does this become confusing? Well, people in general, the first one is tracking errors. Mm-hmm. And this is the biggest one. And this is the one that people hate to hear about because they go, no, I know I'm tracking right. And then I'm like, oh yeah? Weigh every single thing you eat for a week and let me know what happens. And usually 75% of the time, if they actually do it, what happens is they come back and they go, I lost 2 pounds. It's like, yeah, because you stopped snacking. Because I told you to weigh every single thing you were eating and you got much more mindful about what you were putting in your mouth. Just like if you start keeping a budget, you spend less money because you are very mindful about where your dollars are going. That which gets monitored gets adjusted. And we know this to be true in science. If you monitor it, it changes behavior right down to electrons. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle, I believe, is that one. They noticed that when they monitor, it's photons. When they monitored these photons, they changed behavior. So that applies across the board and certainly up to humans, right? So tracking errors, even I had somebody reach out to me one time, and I'll never forget this conversation. They were like, I'm eating 1,600 calories a day. I am tracking everything. I dug into it a little bit more. It turns out they were doing volume measurements, right? So they're doing scoops, quarter cups, whatever. I said, do me a favor, just weigh it out. Do everything you're doing, just weigh it out. One day later, they came back. They said, oh my God, I'm eating 2,700 calories a day.
That's crazy, that difference.
But think about it. If you do a volume measurement, if you ever want to be depressed, weigh out a serving of peanut butter.
I know. It's so depressing.
It is not a tablespoon, okay? No,
it's not.
It's
really
like,
not.
If you take a tablespoon and you completely level it, yeah, then there you go, right? And so I think a lot of people just eyeball stuff. Or they go, I had a bowl of cereal. A serving of cereal is usually 3/4 of a cup to a cup. It'll usually barely cover the bottom of a bowl. of a modern bowl. Because, oh, by the way, in the 1800s, dinner plates were this big, and now they're this big.
Yeah.
And they keep getting bigger, right?
Right.
Bowls, the same thing. I have like bowls in my cabinet that are this big around. Like if I put a serving of cereal in there, I'm going to look at that and go, well,
that's like 4 servings.
Right. You have a bowl of ice cream. It's like 2 or 3 servings.
Yeah.
Right?
I weighed out my ice cream the other day and it was really depressing.
Yeah.
It was really depressing.
Exactly. Exactly. And so, I mean, just go, like if you go to a restaurant, now that they have calories on there, look at the menu. Mm-hmm. Cheesecake Factory.
It's a full day's out.
Go look at every single salad at Cheesecake Factory. They're all over 1,000 calories for a salad.
Yeah.
Okay. So people believe they're eating low calories, but they're not. And we see this in the research literature. In fact, again, a classic study in nutrition in 1992 published in the New England Journal of Medicine. They brought people in. They recruited specifically people who reported being weight loss resistant, could not lose weight on 1,200 calories a day. They required this for people to actually be in the study. I think it was about a dozen people. And they told them, we're going to be able to track everything you eat. If you underreport, we will know. And they underreported by an average of 53%.
Wow.
And some of them even argued with the researchers afterwards. And it's like, no, we have objective data on this. And they looked at their BMRs and their total daily energy expenditure, their lean mass. And what was really interesting is so many people focus on the metabolism side of obesity. We have known for years, obese people on average do not have slower metabolisms than lean people. In fact, on an absolute ratio, they have faster metabolisms. This is very consistent in the literature. Now, when you standardize for lean mass, they've about the same, maybe still a little bit faster. And that applies to type 2 diabetics as well. This applies for obese, non-obese, type 2 diabetics, non-type 2 diabetics. 80% of the variance in BMR is explained by lean mass. You can almost draw, and in this study they did it, you can draw a straight line through lean mass and their BMR. And I think the biggest variation from what was predicted was like 30 calories. And I actually think that the person had a 30 calorie faster per day BMR. But by the way, 30 calories, like that is within the detection limits of that equipment. Okay. Like it's not really different. Okay.
Right.
So they showed they didn't have slower metabolisms. They were underreporting their food intake by 53%, and they overreported their physical activity by 47%. But this shouldn't surprise anybody. Americans underreport their debt by 150% because we're main characters and we're the heroes of our story, right?
Yep.
And we don't like that. A lot of people don't like that accountability, shining on them, right? And so we lie to ourselves about serving sizes, whatever. But if you could just embrace the fact that accountability is freedom, if it was in your power, people tie fault and responsibility together. There's a lot of things that play into obesity. I used to be one of these people who was like, okay, if you're obese, you're just lazy. I no longer think that, because how many examples do we need of obese people who are very successful in some area of their life? Mm-hmm. And so there's, of course, the food environment, big thing, trauma, stress, lifestyle, environmental factor. It could be dozens, if not hundreds of inputs that are coming together to fuel this. But it may not be your fault, but it's still going to be your responsibility to make the changes in order to lose weight. So again, I think a lot of people hear that data underreporting and they go, "You're calling me a liar." I don't think that people are necessarily lying. I just think that people don't have a good idea of what portion sizes are. And if you've never weighed, and I'm not saying you have to weigh every single thing for the rest of your life. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's good to go through and give your diet an audit every once in a while, right? Just like your budget. Right?
Yeah.
Go through and give it an audit. If you're having trouble losing weight, just for 1 week, weigh out every single thing you put in your mouth. I'll be shocked if you don't lose weight that week. Or you'll realize, wow, I was eating a lot more than I thought I was. So that's the biggest reason why people get confused. The next one is they overestimate how many calories they burn per day, by far. I mean, these watches, I'll post a screenshot of my watch at the end of a workout, mostly so people can see the time and my heart rate, but then it shows calories on there. This is not correct. Because if it was correct, I'd be losing weight like this. like I would be losing so much weight.
You'd be disappearing.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I know what my BMR is because I've had it measured before. It's like 1,900 calories per day. Well, this is telling me that I burn 2,000 calories in my workout. So that's 3,900 calories per day, not even including TEF or any kind of NEAT. Mm-hmm. So I should be like 4,500 calories a day. I maintain my weight on 3,300 calories a day. So it's obviously wrong. And I'll tell people, what do you think is more likely? That you are violating the laws of thermodynamics, or that maybe your watch is not accurate?
Yeah.
Or your treadmill or your bike or whatever it may be, right?
Yeah.
So none of those things are real accurate. There was a meta-analysis back in 2018, I want to say, that showed that most of these wrist-worn devices overestimated calories burned from exercise by anywhere from 28 to 93%.
93%.
So yeah. So, you burned 2,000 calories? No, it was probably more like 1,000 to 1,400, something like that. So that's another way that people miss it. And online calculators. People go on, they punch in their data, and it says, eat this to lose weight. And then they eat that and they don't lose weight. And I'll say, again, what do you think is more likely? That you are violating the laws of thermodynamics, or that maybe that was not accurate for you? Because maybe it's accurate for 60, 70% of the population. Maybe you're a little bit of an outlier. And also, like people with long dieting history, metabolic adaptation, people will say, well, I'm eating this amount of calories and I'm stuck losing weight. Well, they've been dieting for, 12 weeks or whatever it is. And we know that your BMR can drop by, 15% above what you would predict based on the amount of weight you lose. Mm-hmm. And also your NEAT, we know that losing 10% of your body weight, your NEAT can drop by 400 to 500 calories a day. So let me give you a real life example. So I maintain my body weight on 3,300 calories a day. If I go to 2,700 calories, that's a pretty good deficit for me. But again, my BMR, 1,900, let's just say 2,000 for easy numbers. If I lose 10% of my body weight and my BMR drops 15%, that's 300 calories down, right there. If I lose 400 calories from NEAT, that's 400 plus 300, 700 calories. So what started as a deficit for me is now maintenance, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that really confuses some people. People think calories in, calories out are these independent variables that don't affect each other. No, they are interdependent variables. One affects the other. And there's actually evidence that calories out also affects calories in, right? It's kind of the constrained energy expenditure model of obesity. Or not obesity, but just like constrained energy expenditure model. So all these things come into play that confuse people. But again, you aren't creating carbons out of nothing. I don't care about your hormones. I don't care. Yes, there are hormones like thyroid hormone that can reduce your energy expenditure, but nobody came out of a concentration camp in World War II obese. No one, not a single person. They all came out frail, almost starved to death. When you put it in tight constraints, it doesn't play. Again, yeah, like people bring up, what about hormones? Well, there's really only one hormone, really, that makes a big divot in energy expenditure, and that's thyroid hormone. But again, I have people all the time, well, my hormones out of whack. Oh, really? What did your blood work say? Oh, you haven't had it measured. Oh, I find this a lot. They'll blame hormones blanketly. Well, why haven't you had it measured? Well, they haven't had it measured because if they had it measured and it was normal, they no longer have an excuse. Or if they had it measured and it was abnormal, now you can get it fixed. And again, there's not an excuse anymore. And I say this with as much love in my heart as I can, because I understand people confuse simple with easy. Yes, the mechanical of weight loss, you must burn more calories than you consume, is simple. That does not make it easy. Just like in order to save money, you have to earn more than you spend. I don't think there's a person on this planet who would debate that. I think I read something that like 70 or 80% of Americans can't write a $5,000 check. So, yeah. And that there's plenty of people who make over six figures who are dead broke or are deeply in debt. But they know the information. They know that. Well, so why can't they just save money? Well, because obviously spending habits are tied up in habits and behavior. Just like food is not an equation. It is our entire life. people want to talk about food as if it's like this, just like the X's and O's are what's important. No, it's behavior modification, lifestyle modification. If you talk to people who were formerly obese, who lost weight and kept it off, they changed their life looks completely different now than it did before. So many people say they want results, but what they really want is to get results while still being able to drag all their bad habits and behaviors behind them. And you're not going to do it. It's not going to happen. You might get results in the short term, but you're not going to get them in the long term unless you change your lifestyle, which facilitates the calorie deficit in order to enable you to lose weight. So I realize I just gave a very, very long-winded explanation for that, but I've heard all the arguments counter to it, and I just want to touch on one more. People say, well, again, hormones, big thing. In research, the biggest decrease in metabolic rate that I have seen from any hormone is thyroid. The biggest documented decrease I've seen in metabolic rate is 25%. Okay, which is, I mean, that's pretty big. So let's take, a lot of females, that are around normal size, probably have BMR around 1200, something like that. Okay, so you're talking about chopping off 300 calories from there. That's a good chunk. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean you can't lose weight. It just means it's going to be more difficult for you if it's left untreated. But you can treat it. But then they kind of put this nebulous like hormones, like, the sex hormones. There's some evidence that like if you have an estrogen drop, that replacing that estrogen can increase your energy expenditure. But we're talking 50 to 100 calories a day. None of these things stop metabolism from working. There are no 0 calorie burners. That's called being dead, right? Yeah. There is just a certain level of calories that you have to burn to be able to live and stay alive. And so when people say, I ate 1,000 calories per day and I didn't lose weight, it's very, very unlikely. It's very unlikely. Is it possible? I guess if somebody was very, very small and didn't move much, I guess it's possible. But then why are they trying to lose weight if they're so small?
Yeah, I mean, their basal metabolic rate would have to be like 1,000 calories, right?
Right. I mean, again, and again, when you go in and you look at type 2 diabetics, obese people, they do not have slower metabolic rates. They do not have less energy expenditure. If anything, on an absolute amount, they have more.
If you enjoyed this clip of the Rena Malik MD podcast with Dr. Layne Norton, make sure to check out the full episode right here.